Hi, and welcome to the Blue Morpho Podcast. I'm Hamilton Souther, founder of Blue Morpho, and today I am honored to have Alistair Langer from Berlin on the podcast with me. This is a cross-continent, cross-international, global podcast at this moment. Alistair, thanks so much for being here with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Hamilton.
For those who don't know you, I would love it if you would share a little bit about yourself and where you are today in your mission, what your mission is, and who you're currently working with.
Yeah, so the outward-facing avatar I consciously built is coined Catalyzing Radical Systemic Change. So when you Google Catalyzing Radical Systemic Change, you will find a podcast and a website where I share quite a bit about me. So I work as an agent on behalf of a portfolio of organizations that, try to tackle the challenges we're facing collectively, from ultra large scale infrastructure change, most of it invisible. So like, what is the currency design we're currently using, or how do we design cities? So I advise on a think tank, which is called Dark Matter Labs, amongst other things in my portfolio. Another piece in my portfolio is building up Cohere, which is a member-owned co-working and co-living community connecting spaces in Germany, in Guatemala, in Peru, in Ecuador, Colombia, Brazil. So we're starting with these 6 properties. There's more to share. I will also play a role in the global rollout of Holochain. Holochain himself, or themselves, coining themselves, not a blockchain, though there are distributed ledger technology. They're basically challenging the underlying assumptions of all of the existing layer 1 crypto infrastructures, and truly aiming to build the next evolution of the invisible infrastructure for the next internet to be really decentralized. I think that's sufficient for this like personal persona. I would like to end maybe the intro with where I am personally. I will turn 44 pretty soon, and most of my life, which will then be part of the unpacking my healing journey and my waking up and the healing journey, I was really haunted by nightmares, panic attacks. I had a pretty early traumatic childhood episode, and since 6 years, which I always coin as the breakthrough in my trauma therapy, I'm finally like really stable and can funnel the amount of like life force or life current or chi or prana, whatever you want to call it, through me for these many endeavors where I really try to make a difference. So I think that was quick, but should give the people like a soul picture from Allister.
Well, that's just amazing. First of all, I commend you for your effort in helping the world be a better place. And I love the idea that we think about leaving it in a better state than the way that we found it, that we're actually agents of improvement. And it sounds like literally everything that you're working on, which has a broad scope to it, sounds incredibly important in terms of that mission. So first, I just want to commend you for that. And I want to ask, how did you come up with the idea of catalyzing radical systemic change?
I think there's 2 facets to share, one of which is my biography. I grew up in a community, so I'm really one of these couple of few million or so that grew up in what I would coin like a community 1.0. So my parents don't look really like hippies, but they always did permaculture. So I grew up in a community, basically like semi-sufficient and growing our own food and stuff like that. And since my father was founding member of the German Green Party, I really grew up, I think, through the umbilical cord with the systemic question. And then he built up the first PR agency in Germany, focusing on sustainability topics. And when the Mosaic browser launched in 1995, I built up a database of more than 30,000 sustainability articles, and basically like linking all these articles so that people could find them to whatever 2,000 media outlets, all in the DACH region, so Germany, Austria, Switzerland. We're talking now about the German speaking countries. And anyhow, the listeners will already have recognized a little bit my German accent, so much to that. The second answer is I really think an important one. Catalyzing radical systemic change for me, seen through the lens of what some people coin the integral framework, means that I don't see myself as an isolated individual. I'm like, sure, I have a seemingly in like separate body, but I myself can work kind of catalyzing the radical systemic change within myself, which has been my healing journey, also connected to plant medicine, which I think we will dive deeper into in a bit. The other one is I also exist in a cultural context, and I also exist in a systemic context. And again, disclaimer, I'm not saying you need to agree with everything from the integral framework. Like all abstractions, it's really just a meta framework. But it helped me in my mid-20s after my studies to kind of really very strategically map my life's journey in this like very short, precious lifetime that we're given, and ideally try to combine in my endeavors and also in my portfolio, like the individual work, like which, for example, would be working with plant medicine or doing my own meditation and healing journey. The other one is the culture piece, where I advise on pro-social, which is a cultural change technique, which works with Elinor Ostrom's work on how to govern the commons. And then, for example, in the systems piece, like advising on like a think tank like Dark Matter Labs, like that I'm really just trying to basically still bridge these many divides that still and silos that are still out there in most of the endeavors.
Yeah. One of the things that's been really interesting since I got to meet you is kind of have a window into the evolution of community and what is coming out of, might be what was called the hippies in the 60s and 70s. And then this gap, maybe we don't have a name for it, or there is one I'm not aware of. And then now this new generation of community that's coming out that, from my experience, and like I say, this window from the outside is much more grounded in terms of the impact that it's trying to make. It sounds like in terms of like a holistic form and much more integrated with other systems within society. And so I wonder if you could talk with me about that. How do you see this community forming? What is it? Kind of break it down for us.
I think breaking down, I mean, this is purely subjective, but I think ultimately good old Hegel, like the thesis, the antithesis, and then the synthesis. So good old dialectics. So when I just look at my parents, right, like both my parents come from a very conservative background. You can see that also through the spiral dynamics lens, so to say. So obviously they needed to rebel against a very quote unquote spiral dynamics blue, so very rigid, very religious parents. So what did they do? Well, they went from whatever, for example, monogamy to polyamory, because my parents are polyamorous, for example, and I love them, because it seems they're one of the few examples who still live it in their ways, separate deep rabbit hole. And now me as their offspring, so to say, I found, for whatever reason, most of the communities that I found in the global eco-villages network or intentional communities, or also the circles, especially here in Berlin, that have never lived in community, I found always that I need to give up too much of a healthy individuality. So the classical community 1.0 could, for example, also be like Pune or many other things, where basically you give up a certain part of yourself, and now you all pray to one guru or one lineage, or you're all vegan, or you're all vegetarian, or you're all anti-nuclear, or whatever. Whereas the new communities that I personally find more interesting are more like a hive mind and a hive heart, maybe. that need a certain infrastructure, they need a certain jurisdictional container, they need a governance structure, and so forth, but within which there's a much bigger bandwidth, a much bigger difference in between these different individuals. Hence, for example, also me supporting Cohere, which again is not a classical intentional community in the sense of like the 60s or 70s.
Yeah, in terms of Cohere itself, for those who don't know, what is Cohere? What's its mission? What is it trying to accomplish?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so with Cohere, basically the main thing that we want to do is we want to house change makers, right? So the market for digital nomads out there is just exploding. Like everybody jumps on it. Most of them, obviously, with just another extractive business model, like hence also three-digit $1 million sums, given to endeavors like that. So we didn't accept VC money. We're kind of crowd-funded, crowd-raised, and we really aim at I would say, prototypical first step towards a network state where we say, okay, sweethearts, first of all, it's a member-owned community. So who are the members? So you can't simply become a member. You really need to apply for membership. So what qualifies you as a change maker, as a social entrepreneur, as a spiritual teacher, as a yoga teacher, as a change maker? And then you become part of the community. And with the community, we really try to tackle one of the main challenges for most social entrepreneurs. I'm not excluding myself. I've never worked in mainstream, so I don't have assets that are working for me. I never, earned big consulting money. So I'm in a phase in my life where really these topics of at least a little bit of security in the old age and living with values aligned people are really moving to the forefront. So from a business to consumer perspective, we're offering housing for change makers in the before mentioned locations: Germany, Guatemala, Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, Brazil, starting with these 6, most likely also Bali and others. We're in due diligence with over 50 different properties. But that's what we do. And usually people either live permanently nomadic, which I never did, also not aspire to. But many people really say, oh, at least these whatever cold winter months in Berlin, I want to escape to a beautiful tropical haven and spend 3 months. But I don't simply want to rent an Airbnb. I actually want to spend these precious months where I like kind of work part-time or full-time or work and travel, but I want to spend this time with values aligned change makers that ultimately really help me cross-pollinate my endeavor, but beyond the buzzword, really people that know the sector, that have been through maybe some of the same pitfalls than you have been, and really just help each other. And from a B2B, so business to business standpoint, what we're trying to aim at is basically building a community owned land fund, like based on a trust structure, to permanently take out of the capitalist speculative market these amazing pieces of property, but co-inhabitate them with the hive mind, hive heart, whatever you want to call it, but with values aligned change makers, and not just create another business model that just creates more externalities for the many generations after us.
Yeah, one of the things I really think is interesting about Cohere and what I see it disrupting is 2 really fundamental difficulties that I've seen and friction points in this idea of how you actually get change made. And one of them is that you need to have contact with people that are of that same mindset and that share those same values and that can actually help each other and cross-pollinate different ideas. And especially as a young startup entrepreneur, you know that there are so many potential pitfalls that other people need to cover and help and support. And the Cohere network seems like an unbelievable opportunity for people looking for that kind of support in real life, not just the URL life, but now the in real life, being there together, having community, having the support of another person, their advice, their mentorship, etc. Literally right there, the helping hand. pardon me. And then the other side of it that I see is this question: if you really want to make a change and you're not really participating in, the old way of doing things, you also don't get the benefits of the old way of doing things, which is fundamentally amassing capital over time and having that capital work for you. And it's typically associated in different kinds of assets that are lower risk assets that, really grow in value slowly over time. And the one that we know of best over the last, 50 to 100 years is real estate. And this is where Cohere is actually creating a system. It's a new kind of system where there is a co-ownership of that real estate that sits underneath the company itself. And to me, it's just a brilliant model to ultimately support people, so that if you really were a change maker and you really are digitally nomadic and you're going to be part of community and go live the next 20, 30 years of your life in that space, you wouldn't have rooted, in essence, on the farm, building the farm and the value of the farm. You'd have gone and helped all these farms, these mental creative farms, permaculture farms, food forest farms. You'll be part of changing the world for the better. But you'll also then, over those 20, 30 years, be able to look back on it and say that you do have an asset base that you worked on building, and that you do have now that asset that's working for you in the old world economy. And I believe that this model has tremendous potency going forward because of that.
Nah, thanks for the flowers, Hamilton. Let's hope for the best. Also to finish that part on Cohere, we're early stage, but we're not totally newbies in the sector. So all of the co-founders work in the sector for plus a decade. And I think the lift that we're trying to do within the next half year, so pretty much up until we meet in Peru, is like, can we jointly, many hundreds, we're couple of hundred, we're 300 plus now, aiming not to grow too fast, so maybe being in the range of maybe 1,000 or so in few months, is like, can we, the sum aggregate of the hive mind and hive heart, really unlock also the investment, the values aligned investment, to really co-create this first, let's say, fund one, that we co-own these 6 pieces of property together, instead of trying to fundraise for one piece of property, which is, from a hedging against risk perspective, anyhow not so favorable. Hence most or many products always, exist in a fund structure, and we're doing that community owned. I think that's good for Cohere, right? This is not an advertisement for Cohere.
No, but I think it's important because it's a model that represents a kind of grounded philosophy in the economic systems that exist today. And as part of this change, it shows there's a movement of inclusion instead of exclusion and revolution. So what I think is important to represent is that it isn't an idea that is revolutionize everything that exists today, but rather use the beneficial and positive aspects of it to be able to support the people who are making this change. And one of the biggest issues in dedicating your life to this kind of evolution of humanity is that there hasn't been a safety net built within it. There isn't a way that is understood yet to be part of community, but also economically benefit over time, which is also necessary considering the current systems that we face. And so, I agree, now is a great time to shift gears, but I think it's also important to understand that these models are in creation, and if you're in that space, you know about it. But if you're outside of that space, wishing for something different in your life and you don't know about it, I think it's important that people start to hear that this kind of exists, and these models are coming out, and they could offer a wide variety of opportunities for people who are looking to live a different or alternative lifestyle. That being said, your alternative lifestyle goes much further back. This isn't where it all started for Allister. It goes back to, obviously, a bit of a difference in your family structure, which you've been open to sharing. But then along the way, it also comes into your own healing journey and then plant medicines. And so I would love to hear about how plant medicines ultimately came in to influence that healing journey, and kind of go on a deep dive into what's going on with plant medicines, the psychedelic renaissance, and talk a little bit more about that. So for us now, paint the picture. Take us into the world of Allister. How many years ago was it? How did plant medicines come to find you? And what was it like embracing them, and what did they do for you?
Yeah. I think, first of all, there's a preface. My preface, let's frame this let's give it a funny biographical notion and a tragic one. So the tragic one was, again, I was 2 years and 8 months old. I play in the kitchen. The boiling hot coffee machine, these automatic coffee machines from the 80s, falls over, and I burn my whole left upper leg. And I wake up, basically my father driving me to the hospital. And this was always my first childhood experience. I was never able to go before that childhood experience. And the result, which only got detected way too late, was what you would call post-traumatic stress disorder. My coping mechanism was to develop almost prodigy-like mental faculties, like being super good in school and learning to read and write and stuff like that. And my coping mechanism was mainly alcohol and party, So I was not a heavy alcoholic. I was one of these guys who just did party a lot in their 20s. I luckily, really luckily, knock on wood here, I never touched any hard substance, like whatever cocaine or amphetamines. But I was really a booze and party guy. And in my early 30s, so actually, I don't think you would coin that plant medicine. I knew that one of my closest friends was doing work with psychedelics, not like in a party setting. So I remember a day when I was 31, where I got administered MDMA from this guy who was not a professional psychotherapist, but trained in psycholytics therapy. And I was asked to only focus on one question. And the one question was, how did you feel before you burned yourself, your left upper leg? And it didn't really come to a feeling or a solution, or nothing came up. And I got administered a dash more, which sometimes can happen. And then suddenly, after, I have no idea, maybe 2 hours or so, and MDMA in a strict sense is not a psychedelic, but I really think it's important to frame then my other journeys. And suddenly there was this feeling, which I think you can even hear from the tone of my voice, or even more when you see me dancing or doing a workout. I always in my whole life had this incredible, huge amount of life current running through me. But in a way, what happened through the trauma is I was afraid myself of that life force, because ultimately I was always afraid of again hurting myself. And in multiple instances, which would be too lengthy, which many traumatized people, or I mean, it's an abused word because everybody just uses it, but in my sense, it makes sense. I was really time and again creating circumstances to basically re-traumatize myself, And this was definitely a big breakthrough. And from that on, also my psychotherapeutical cycles with normal psychotherapists just went deeper. I think that was one piece. And then, truth be told, I don't know why, my first psychedelic experience was ayahuasca. I also don't know if that was the right decision, but it was what it was, in Berlin. And I did it with this odd thing, because it was the thing I was most afraid of dying. This was like the core wound, or the last, guardian, I thought, right? So I did do ayahuasca, and then I did it, I think, way too often, like 30, 40 times or so, just really many times. And just to paraphrase the first episode with ayahuasca, which was not funny at all, I think it was the highest dose in terms of the DMT component in it. So it was so strong, it just completely blew me open, apart. I have no idea. And the hallucinations were so strong that me with closed eyes and opened eyes, I could not really even make a difference, trying to open my eyes and being less in the trip, was too strong. And I think it's good then to say that Ultimately, it was a psychotherapist with a background in psychedelics, a woman in her 70s that works with psychedelics since 40 years and is a trained trauma therapist, that a couple of years later, maybe 5 years later or so, basically told me, Alistair, I don't think that ultimately your healing journey, meaning for Alistair, should mean you should just drink more ayahuasca, which a lot of people are doing out there. And she basically said, I will work with you, but only under the premise that you don't do any psychedelics at all, especially not ayahuasca. And then came a cycle of, I think, 3 to 4 years or so, where I didn't do psychedelics, where I didn't do ayahuasca, and was really just doing the groundwork, maybe, really just like, it's not very fucking fancy. You meet this therapist lady, once a week, and you talk about your issues, how you handle your relationship, your money, your family issues, whatever issues you have in life. So I think the disclaimer for those listening is just to drink more medicine is not necessarily the answer. Also, disclaimer from a non-dual perspective, yes, maybe for some people to reach a breakthrough, right? Sometimes a ceremony more can help, but also in many instances, also certainly in Berlin and certainly from many people I meet, more medicine, meaning more psychedelics, is not the answer. I think that was a big and a very painful learning. So usually she says, yeah, maximum whatever, every quarter, maximum 2 times a year, maybe for some people also only once a year. And then the rest is all about integration. Like, what did you see? What did you learn? What did it trigger? And how can you ultimately transform that in everyday life? But it seems I always needed to take the hard, the hard road, the tough cookie thing,
I think that's an important premise to come from as we're seeing this expansion in psychedelic use and this sort of psychedelic renaissance taking place, that people are mistaking the role or the purpose of the substances in their journey. And I think we're seeing this a lot where people are both just using it over and over and over again for what they think is a healing purpose. And then other people are just using it over and over again for either escapism or exploration. And in both of those cases, there's in some cases, there's a dependency that can be created on that and an actual lack of going into the place that somebody thinks that they're actually trying to achieve. My understanding that in the healing process with ayahuasca down here in the Amazon, they do a series of 2 to 3 ceremonies. The locals typically do a series of 2 to 3 ceremonies, and that lasts anywhere from 6 months to a year. And they only go back and use it again if there's a need. And that would be like, to support that healing process a little bit more, but that they would tell you that the healing is going to take 6 months to a year, but that the first intervention with ayahuasca is going to happen in the first week. And then after that, it would be very much like you say, it's a process of actually working through yourself. And the ayahuasca is used to kind of break through the barriers, or break through the mental patternings, or help somebody dislodge and create movement where there was stagnation. And then after that, it's a process that they describe as working with the plant spirit, which is an idea of this energy is within you and it's helping you and it's supporting you be able to move on. But I think that that's very real and something that needs to be shared in this new psychedelic healing culture that's coming out, that you can just as easily create a dependency upon the psychedelics as you can any other kind of negative behavior or negative habit. And really the self-help and the transcendence of the trauma or depression or anxiety or PTSD or addiction or just the malaise that people experience is actually like you say, it's an integrative process. And for people just to keep that in mind, that if you're looking for, the magic support, you can get it from the plant medicine, but really there's a lot of drudgery. There's a lot of working with yourself and that evolutionary process that comes with that. through your journey early on with ayahuasca, I'm interested in if you had like transcendent experiences or personal experiences of source or divinity or God, something that you would put within those kinds of terms, if that actually opened up for you in those explorations.
Before I answer the question, I want to end the last piece of the conversation and not necessarily recommend, but just say that I very consciously combined, let's say, classical Western approaches to psychotherapy, which are very structured, which have like methods and toolboxes and questionnaires and trained therapists and accredited therapists, and combining that with plant medicine or mysticism. So I'm not saying this needs to be true for other people, but it certainly helped me in my healing journey. To answer your own the question of source. So truth be told, I almost always can with a tab of LSD have like source consciousness in half an hour. With ayahuasca, it's different, at least for me. For me, ayahuasca is always a journey, and I can only coin what I think was on the soul level, consciously using the soul level, although I don't really believe in the soul, but like, let's say the innermost or the kernel or whatever you want to coin it, of our identification, which was the pain that we as humanity, as the dominant species, are destroying the habitat, the mother organism, Gaia, whatever you want to call it. So I know that this is now maybe 8-9 years ago, so I must have been like 35, and certainly after 50 or 60 ceremonies, I was in a journey, and for the first time, I was in the future, and I saw planet Earth perfectly restored, and I saw us as the human species communicating with a lot of other star systems, and was really looking a little bit like Star Wars, but very beautiful, like a very utopian or protopian future. And then maybe a year or two later, I saw the movie Valerian, which is a kind of a kitsch movie, but very beautiful, kind of the most expensive movie ever produced in Europe, which is about a city in the future where 1,000 different sentient species live in peace together. And then obviously the evil ones come in, and you have, the hero and stuff like that. So I would say the deepest vision, I don't know, for me, ayahuasca, all my journeys are ultimately very visionary. And when I don't know if I mastered the plant, I'm not a master shaman, but now that I've done it so often, you kind of know the road, or like you kind of know how to navigate it. So I use it more in a sense of I would call it like astral travels. So I was always interested in like, okay, how does it feel inside of the Dalai Lama, But I was also always interested in like exploring the evil. Like, how would it feel to be inside of Hitler or Stalin or something like that? So in that sense, for me, ayahuasca is really has more this like journey component to it. And I don't know if that's easy to cut in the podcast. My deepest source experience I had through the plant called iboga, which I did 4 times, also in a shamanic training, also in Berlin. Not what you call a full flood, so not 72 hours locked in, but like kind of 24 to 32 hours, really, you can't really move. And there, the experience was pretty similar to what I train in Samadhi training. So every morning, since a couple of years, I do like Samadhi training, which comes from old Vedic scriptures, how you train to basically ask into the witness consciousness, right? And then sometimes, usually this only lasts a couple of seconds, right? The witness, or what you think is the witness, and the subject and the object duality become one. So you have like a unity experience, or a void experience, or something like that. And on iboga, this was so profound that I was kind of in that void, and after that void was really just a full hours long, definitely my most intense Samadhi experience or enlightenment experience, whatever you want to coin it. I was really just one with light, one with all, and still there, right? But very much in the moment, and was really just radiating in ecstasy. And I have never had that on ayahuasca. So for me, ayahuasca, I think, will forever be in my life. A thing that I will do maybe every once a year, or something like that. Like kind of, I think that's round about the rhythm. And also with you, what I want to explore after the healing experience is more like, how can I hold the space? How can I be a guardian to accompany others into their journey, which is kind of just a different life phase that I'm at. And I think, yeah, part of our encounter is certainly exploring that.
Yeah, amazing. In the iboga experience, what was that like? That deep samadhi, what did that feel like for you? What happened? What was space time like?
Yeah, so it was very interesting because it was in my second iboga journey, I very much kind of prayed for that, or was invoking that. So I really was saying, okay, now if you've meditated and contemplated on the void, for whatever 25 years, I started to meditate very early in my life. And so what came was more like a falling into the inside. And then it seems a very archetypal picture was coming, and I was really just seeing that one eye, the eye of Horus. And whereas always with ayahuasca, still I was afraid of like diving through that, or of the dying process or something like that. Through the support of the sacred plant, and in that sense, iboga, I was for the first time really just having this, okay, I just let go, and felt like almost swimming through that eye of Horus. And then, I mean, just talking about this activates my fontanella. It's really so funny because I had so many unity consciousness experiences in my life, but never so deep and so long, because it must have been many hours. I think it felt like, for the first time in my life, almost like in my nightmares, but the positive side of it, it felt like falling into infinite black space, void, nothingness. And it felt like, also like in the darkness retreat, I feel like I want to share also something about like my experience in the darkness retreat a little bit later in the podcast. So it felt like almost like consciously inviting that black matter, that before anything causal, open, void space, to invite to penetrate the material matter, to merge with it, to infuse it, to penetrate it, to kiss it, to make love with it. So it was a very juicy experience. And the only next thing that I remember is that with eyes closed and eyes open, I was lying almost like Jesus on the cross, like on the back, but with my arms in this like cross position. And it felt really like a beam of light, like in the middle of my body, in between the heart chakra and the hara, really just like this infinite amount of light through my body. like for many hours. I mean, this was so intense that when the others already went into the integration circle, I was then asking, hey, can I be in a separate room? And I was just lying in the separate room and like beaming with joy and love and light for, I have no idea, maybe 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, I have no idea, but a very prolonged time. And this I never had in my life, like in such an intensity, of bathing in this stream of light, so to say. Yeah.
After an experience like that, how do you integrate that? And how does that then impact you kind of like going forward? I mean, if I were a listener having not had this experience, I'd be like, I can't relate to that. What is that, So how does that then get integrated, and how does that impact you after an experience like that?
Mm-hmm. Which brings me, I have, my split screen still a couple of, disclaimers I want to make to those listening. So first of all, don't cling to the experience. Any spiritual master, at least that I trust, would say you can't permanently stay because it's a state of consciousness. It's not a stage of consciousness, it's a state of consciousness. So you will inevitably fall out of it and sometimes be grumpy and overwhelmed and love your partner and sometimes say, this specific thing about my partner I don't like that much, or about my business relationship. So I think a good thing is really just training your humility. The other thing is, what I strongly recommend for every human being is have a daily practice, whatever that is. It's not really that important. Is it breath work? Is it yoga? Meditation is also just a word because there's gazillions of different meditation techniques, but train your state of consciousness every day without a substance. I also recommend without a teacher. The teacher is only the finger pointing to the moon is not the moon. Ultimately, the teacher should give you a technique, a tool, a question, or something like that, over which you ponder for many years. And when it comes to integration, to be very honest, obviously, I usually try to take, for example, a full day off, or something like that. I'm more a guy than going into the spa or going on a prolonged walk in nature. Ideally, obviously, you have a certain moment in space-time that you don't need to engage in the daily hustle and grind of normal day, whatever, entrepreneurial life,
From those experiences going forward, you go into this healing journey with the therapist who tells you, okay, you got to slow down on the psychedelics. You got too much of that up front. How do then they start to come back into your life, and what influence do they have at that time? How old are you at that time?
That's a good question. So, I mean, this very specific point in space-time in 2017, which I always coin as the breakthrough in my trauma therapy, was in the intensity like a Samadhi experience, but very this worldly. It was like finally, in an odd sense, I mean, it was a 10-day retreat, kind of a 10-day ever ongoing non-stop group therapy, right? With a type master shaman and a complete rundown of your psyche. So when I was finally in this like totally overwhelmed, I don't even know my name, totally like almost like psychosis state, she took me and said to me, now you're there, now you get a one-on-one. So I'm sitting in that chair, trembling, crying, snort coming out of my nose, just totally overwhelmed in my whatever state that I was in time and again for 37 years. And then, since we were training all sorts of things, she was just sitting in front of me in a chair and was just telling me, Alistair, are you aware that you are creating this? And I was just, snort, my life, the universe, the collective consciousness, this shitty part we are in humanity, And then it was really again, just a bolt of lightning in my psyche. And I had this, what? Looking at her, and she's like, yeah, do you get it? Do you get it? Are you here? And I'm like, fuck. She's like, yeah, you create your life circumstances. You create your relationships, your business partnerships, your romantic partnerships. You are the only one that's responsible for that. And that was really just like, fuck, it was so deep and profound. And then she said, okay, like kind of, it was on day 6 or 7 of this 10-day retreat. And then she told me, okay, it seems like from this day on, you can start building what you think you understood on the inside. And ever since, this cycle of, trauma victim, is really minus 99%. So I'm really, finally, I don't know, like my father, for example, was always like rock solid dude, he was never like whimsy and crying or addicted or whatever, but I certainly was. Yeah.
And after that, where does then plant medicine come back into this exploration?
That's okay. So we're now pretty in the now. So Magdalena, besides, so I hardly ever changed my teacher, which is true also for my spiritual teachers. So Magdalena, a woman from Berlin with whom I did 98% of all shamanic journeys with ayahuasca, San Pedro, mushrooms, and iboga, was offering like a shamanic training circle with kind of the same group of people that I knew now almost for whatever 10 years or so. And in an odd sense, I was not attracted. I had this, well, I've done this so often, so why do it again? But there was a voice inside of myself that told me, well, like going again into the ceremonial setting after subjectively having done the work on myself will just educate me on better understanding what's the setting, what typology of people benefit from it. Also, since I've been working with different plants and also other chemical substances like MDMA, also trying to understand what typology of trauma, what typology of substance really helps people. Funny that I'm not applying this in my business yet, but separate rabbit hole. We can dive into that in Peru. There's just so many people who now all work as psychotherapists and healers and shamans. I don't know. At least not at this specific point in my lifetime, I don't feel called to doing that. So it was more almost the scientist inside of myself, like going again into a setting, but under a very different premise. Yeah.
And what plants came back? Where did you find yourself? Did ayahuasca come back? Was it San Pedro? Was it iboga? What called you on this other side?
It's interesting because the upcoming weekend, literally the next weekend, I will work with the Virarica, so the guardians of the peyote. So I now throw peyote and San Pedro into one bucket, but I mean the psychedelic compound is masculine. So the way I also have a video where I recorded this, which I think it's coined the psychedelic experience. So I think different plants trigger different parts of your psyche or your chakras. So for me, working with Mother Ayahuasca is almost always just bowing down in front of the great mystery that ultimately it's all a big mystery. We don't know shit. It teaches me humility. It certainly also teaches us to die and to be reborn time and again, a blank slate. Usually then people, I think also you combine it with San Pedro, usually after grinding the ego, to then activate the hara, the solar plexus, the willpower. So it's a very masculine plant spirit. It teaches you directionality, benchmarks, goals in life, things you want to achieve, gives you a very clear focus. So the complementarity of ayahuasca and San Pedro in, let's say, neo-shamanic settings, I don't think is a coincidence. Iboga, I don't feel called necessarily to do iboga. I mean, I don't feel called to do any substance anyhow very deeply, but I think there will come a moment where I will do iboga, but I feel like it's also now almost 14 years of work with these sacred sacraments, so to say. So it feels like a big cycle closing, and that cycle, I think that's good to riff over, to share also with your audience my experience in the darkness retreat, and to share like similarities and differences in the darkness retreat. I think that would be beautiful.
Before we go into the darkness retreat, I want to go back to this piece that you described about the shaman who tells you that you're creating it, and that you're in this moment of catharsis and difficulty and trauma and victimization and rationalization and the mental states that go along with that. And I think it's an unbelievably important lesson, which is why I want to highlight it. This idea that we're creating. So we're creating our reactions, we're creating our mentalizations, we're creating our thoughts, we're creating our feelings, we're creating the way we're tying together information. It's not the complete picture. It's a lens on our own psyche and our own experience with it. And this idea of us, creating, I'm not saying that we're creating the entire universe the way that it is. I'm not saying that we're creating some hologram of Earth in a treacherous state, but that throes of catharsis that you are in, you're creating, and you can drop out of it and become still. And I think that's what a lot of the Buddhic teachings are about when they talk about stillness, is, the ending of that mental catharsis and reaction. And so I think that's such a potent lesson to highlight for everybody, is that we're creating our experience. We're creating these cycles that we're in. We're creating our responses. We're creating our thoughts. But I think it's very hard for people to grasp it in real time, that they are the creator of that entire paradigm of experiences. So I want to go back to that moment where you actually, were in catharsis, and then you dropped out of it for the first time and realized, oh my God, I am creating this. What was that experience like for you? And how did then that play out going forward, sort of that rooting within you more and more to become that centered, stable person, grounded person that you're now describing?
I mean, ultimately, I think it's a lifelong process. I think I was always very disciplined, and I think my invisible black door was always obviously using my psychological problems for like all sorts of excuses, right? Like, I have these problems, and I'm melancholic, and I'm depressed, and I'm addicted, and the world, goes to shit anyhow. And the description from my teacher is, which I think it comes almost like from martial arts, she's like, train your willpower. Like you have no excuse. I mean, I'm not saying when they drop a nuclear bomb on top of my head, but besides, stuff like that, the more responsibility I take for my life circumstances, the bigger is also the likelihood that I find the solutions. And what I really like about the teacher, her name is Brigitte, so a woman, is that she brings a decades-long tool set. And when I sometimes speak with her, and I'm also surprised on how deep the transformation is from now and 10 years ago, she tells me, hey, maybe you were lucky because I was a ballet dancer, a professional ballet dancer. So discipline has always been a strong point in my life. So ultimately, like meditative practice or a workout in the gym or building a business, has to do with discipline and practice. So sit your ass on the ground every day in the morning. I do my meditative practice, and then and very consciously do this manifestation techniques, not manifesting like flying spaghetti or that suddenly the moon is not in the orbit anymore, but really just activating the solar plexus, which in neurolinguistic programming you do with primaries. So it could be like, um, I'm the creator of my thoughts and emotions, for example, right? But you need to create that primary up until you really are convinced that you're creating your thoughts and emotions. Because if not, you just get a secondary that tells you, well, the guy is talking bogus to myself, you know? So it's an ongoing practice to create these primaries in neurolinguistic programming from the center of your solar plexus or your hara, you know, and really say, okay, you know, that's whatever a certain life phase, you know, I want family, for example, as you know, and children and living in community and be a successful entrepreneur, which pretty much the whole thing in this life phase. And to really take ownership, you know, to really own that and to create that. And when then obstacles come around, really just analyze them and say, okay, where is it where me as Allister, I can make a difference? You know, you shall know them by their deeds, you know, they say in the Bible. It's really about that, you know, because what you think and feel and what your own internal thoughts are is one thing, but ultimately other people perceive you by what you're doing, right?
Yeah. Doug, first of all, I love that. I mean, that's incredible. Taking that forward into, you know, all the things you're doing. I mean, I personally see that that's what you're doing. You're creating that a life for yourself, and at the same time, it's built out of a series of deeds of consistent improvement and growth for everybody involved. That idea of community, and you're in the community, so you're also growing as well. But everybody that is being positively impacted by that, and so I want to go through that into now the darkness retreat. You know, number of months ago decide that now's the time for you to do a darkness retreat. And what were you thinking going into the darkness retreat? You were, you know, interested. What was your intention going in? And then describe it to us.
Yeah. So as a child, I was haunted by panic attacks and nightmares. And one feature was I was terribly afraid of anything dark. So I could not sleep in darkness. There was always a light on up until my early to mid 20s. You know, there was always a small lamp on. I could simply not sleep in darkness. I would be terribly afraid. So when I first read about darkness retreats, which was in India when I was 21, and read the autobiography of Sri Aurobindo, who was in isolation and also in a dark, chamber but obviously not by his own will. And he then wrote, he basically reached his, enlightenment, in darkness. I told myself, okay, this is the oddest, most scary thing that I can possibly think of. Okay, you torture me, you kill me, you throw me in prison, you poison me. I mean, all of that, kind of I can accept, but in darkness, in a chamber, alone, is like the oddest thing. So anyhow, 2 years ago, I went to Guatemala. I met a guy whose name is Severin Geza, who owns a retreat center, and it's called The Hermitage. So I didn't go there because it's suddenly on Vogue and, all the clicks go up because some famous people do darkness retreats. I really did it at the very end of my own healing cycle with the working hypothesis that I would really just enjoy it. So I came there and Severin asked me, why are you doing the darkness retreat? And I'm like, I don't know. I think I will really just enjoy it. And he's like, yeah, but you need to have like an intention. And I'm like, well, the only left intention would be to permanently lose my mind, get full enlightenment and become the next whatever, Sadhguru, Allister on the billboards, selling billions and having a huge fellowship and groupies, all of it, sure. And I said, no, I don't really have an intention. And then when I sat alone in the darkness retreat, I still didn't have an intention, but my whole self was so at peace with my journey that I made a wish. And the wish was, I wish it to be a gentle experience. And then I blew out the candle. And what then happened is pretty prototypical. So there's really not one standard book, which is a pity. Severin wants to write it, but they say, and for me it was the same, so I did it for 5 nights and 6 days, that in the first kind of 2 days, your pineal gland produces melatonin. So I didn't feel drowsy. You're just like sleeping a lot, and then you wake up, you may be taking a shower. I got meals served twice a day through a double door so that you don't get kind of light inside, but you can eat in the morning and in the afternoon. And then after your kind of melatonin is depleted, your pineal gland produces serotonin, which is kind of just super mega pleasant. It's really just like popping a pill, but like, endless. You're just like, okay, that's kind of, wow, that's like vibey, that's juicy, like give me more of that. And yeah, I mean, it was really just very pleasant. And then obviously also what many people are looking for in the darkness retreat, I'm not saying me not, was like what happens after, because after that your pineal gland produces DMT and 5-MeO DMT. So I remember waking up and taking a shower and taking a meal and just sitting in my meditative practice. So we're now somewhat day 3 out of these 5 nights. And then suddenly, in a very organic, beautiful, motherly, nurturing frequency, somewhere above me, because you don't really can apprehend distance, but let's say 10 meters above me or something like that, was really just a source of light, like a milk white source of light, and just like dripping from above into my nervous system. And then the next thing that I perceived was just sitting on that huge white ocean of milk white light, and again just very nourishing. And then the third one was like that, this like ocean of white light, which for example through the iboga experience was like a very strong current, was really just permeating through my like heart chakra, hara, like the middle of my body. And the thing is, you really seemingly see that. So because your eyes open, your eyes closed doesn't make a difference, because it's pitch black dark, but suddenly there's all this light everywhere. And then I slept and was really just bathing in like, oh, that's like kind of really nice thing, like bathing in light, kind of cool thing. And then I woke up and my kind of autopoietic system had a question. So what do you do if this like white light shows up again, And I said, well, I think I want to direct it through my nervous system and different biographical episodes and really see if there's still any healing to do or any damage to repair. So I was, for example, a heavy smoker. I quit 8.5 years ago, but I was really smoking quite a lot. And so when then this, like, let's say light phenomena came again, I was really just gently, asking for them to, like, for example, penetrate my lungs and my stomach or my pelvis, or like kind of really just washing my nervous system. I think that was like kind of day 4 or something like that. And then on the last day, I again like slept and ate and meditated. So they were not permanently there, but pretty frequently, like let's say these light waves, light ocean waves, something like that. And then on the last day, I also have this like archetype of the wizard or the magician inside of me. I said, okay, let's play with it. And I don't know why, but here I could literally show it, but my system told me, okay, let's create forms, with this white light. So I said, okay, now I want to see a flying cat, because I have this beautiful alebrije from Mexico, and boom, there it was. Like, okay, cool, flying cat in the middle of the room. And then I said, okay, I want to see a whale. And then boom, there was a whale. And then I said, well, okay, that's not kind of odd. And suddenly I was sitting in an aquarium full of like white fish. Anyhow, I mean, it doesn't really matter. One thing that happened, which I didn't mention, which happened, I think, a day or two earlier, was there was also a very short, I have no idea, maybe 1 hour episode where seemingly all the still stored stuff that I'm afraid of, like killing, genocide, war, deforestation, plastic in the oceans, whatever, mass murdering, stuff like that, showed up in a very rapid sequence in front of my eyes. And my explanation whilst being in that experience, because I was not really so much triggered or touched by it, I was triggered maybe for 10 minutes or so, like literally just, sensing my hormones change. It's just that I have been in this confrontation so many times through ayahuasca and healing journeys, that I just had this, okay, that's also part of the cosmic collective circus, so to say. I just feel like it's also important to mention that. But overall, for me, the experience in the darkness retreat, like the first experience in the darkness retreat, I will do that again. I don't know exactly when, so I can't say what will happen the second or third or fourth or fifth time. But for me, it has been very gentle, very beautiful, very magical, and also really very deep. Yeah, it's very hard to describe what happens. But I'm incredibly grateful. And I'm also grateful that I didn't do it before. Whereas, like I thought I kind of did too much ayahuasca, for example. And with this intervention, it felt like really just like almost sealing hermetically, a very long cycle of interventions and searching and wanting to find out and healing and whatnot. It was really just very gentle and beautiful, very magical.
Since the darkness retreat, how has that experience impacted you coming to this present moment?
I think it's good in the podcast to mention my father. I'm very close to my father. He was a very humble guy, meditates since forever, successfully raised 3 children, and 69 now. And he's just such a humble and simple guy. And I think the older I get, especially in the spiritual scene, the less woo-woo language, the less I'm better than you, or I found it, or whatever. It's really just grounding myself in my everyday life with my current work mode, or I don't know, my fascination for wanting to become a father and kind of accepting that. Let's see if it happens. You're more having this, I think I would like that. I want it now, almost like ordering a burger. Children now, kind of in that mode. But really just a strong sense of humility and gratitude. I mean, I think I am often just very humble and grateful that I have these degrees of freedom and a German passport, and I can do the projects, that I love doing, and I have amazing friends. Really just gratitude, Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful place to stop the podcast. What a wonderful thing to come on such an amazing journey and come to this place of gratitude. And thank you for being a change maker in the world and representing and doing and living what you talk about. How can people find you? What's the best way to get in contact with you, find you? What would you like to share?
Yeah, I think in the show notes, maybe just add my URL. So it's Allister, like the Scottish name Allister, and then Langer, Langer.de. DE is for Germany, you know. Because there they see the portfolio, my life's journey. They can see how they get involved in the projects. I have my own podcast. If they're interested in coaching, they can, whatever, give me a ping. Yeah, because I don't think it makes sense to separately note in the show notes all these different endeavors in my portfolio. I really think just this one URL is sufficient, Hamilton.
Awesome. Alistair, thank you so much for being on the podcast with me. You're an inspiration, and it's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, you beautiful creature. Thanks for having me.